What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto woke up every morning in a different Kunoichi's bed? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Ohoyo Sakura-chan, Sasuke Teme. As usual, the other two members of Team 7 ignored their boisterous teammate. It had been nearly 3 weeks ago that Naruto had brought back Sasuke from the Valley of the End. In that time, Tsunade had found that the cursed seal on Sasuke's neck had been twisting his mind. Its subsequent removal had made a tremendous impact on the young man's mood. Realizing how close he had come to losing everything, Sasuke had reassessed his life and found it wanting. He was still the broody bastard he had been before, but more and more often now he found himself smiling at the antics of his blonde friend, and recently had even considered accepting one of Sakura's invitations to go out with the Rookie 9 for dinner. Sakura had realized exactly how far behind she was really lagging, and had worked hard to make herself into a true Kunoichi. Naruto, while he was still Naruto, a little more cautious perhaps, but still his happy old self. Well, except for this morning, that is. Today Naruto had woken up on the proverbial, wrong side of the bed. Nothing. Every day since we first became a team I've come up and greeted these two, and never. Not one time in almost a year has either one taken a moment to answer me. To say that Naruto wasn't having a good day is actually quite an understatement. He had been up late last night reading some scrolls he found detailing the history of the village. Normally Naruto found history to be quite boring, but last night he just couldn't put the book down. After all, he had finally come to the section pertaining to his hero, the fourth Hokage. I wonder what the fourth would have done in a situation like this. Would he have bothered to continue? It's obvious that neither of them is ever going to answer me. Naruto found himself getting more and more any the longer he thought about it. After all, when Team 7 had gotten back from completing their mission last night, Naruto had raced all the way to Ichiraku's only to find that they had already closed. This fact hadn't bothered him too much until he had gotten to his room and realized that he was out of food completely. He had taken the last of his instant ramen with him on the mission and had forgotten to buy more. Therefore he really hadn't had anything for dinner either. You'd think I'd at least get a nod or something. I mean, shit, did I save that Tami's life or not? Didn't I keep my word? She never did thank me. Hell, she didn't even bother to see if I was alright when I got back to Konoha. She just ran over and started fawning over Sasuke. I nearly died of blood loss, and she had no idea that I was injured until I didn't show up for training the next morning. Unfortunately, Naruto had stayed up so late the night before that he had woken up late this morning. He had barely had time to change his clothes and run out the door. Being forced to skip breakfast, Naruto had now gone almost 24 hours since his last meal. Not a really big thing, but annoying. A little gratitude should have been in order. A hug would have been nice. Hell, even just some cheap thank you card would have been sufficient. On top of that, while he was running to the training grounds, Naruto had run into a large man who was taking his dog for a walk. When he had brushed himself off, the man hadn't even staggered. He had tried to apologize. The man had refused to listen to it though. After calling Naruto a demon, the man had released his dog and ordered it to attack poor Naruto. Thankfully, however, Naruto had gotten quite skilled over the years at evading idiots and their dogs. Even Sasuke hasn't said anything. I didn't really expect much, but a muttered thanks would have been nice. Hell, I'd be happy if he'd just quite calling me Dobi, dead last. But no, he just pretends that it never happened. Faye, I should have just let the asshole go. Hey Teme. I was talking to you. What do you want, Dobi? Not you, jackass, the other one. Sakura and Sasuke looked surprised as they both realized that Naruto had been looking right at Sakura when he had said that. Humph, what do you want now, Naruto? Kami, save me. I don't know why I even bother. Sasuke and Sakura shared another look. Bother with what, Dobi? Naruto's eyes blazed up for a moment, the facade of happiness melting away, and the pain and anger showing bright. It was so unexpected that for a moment both Sakura and Sasuke stepped back. I'm sick and tired of being ignored and insulted. I've given everything I can for both of you, and faced certain death on numerous occasions to save your asses. But now I've had it. When that dipshit we call a sensei finally shows up, tell him I'm taking the day off. With that, Naruto turned and stalked away. Sasuke and Sakura both stood frozen for a few minutes at how different their teammate had acted. However, after a moment Sasuke turned to Sakura. What's got his tail in a knot? Dunno. Kakashi probably won't be showing up for another hour or so though, let's go find out, shall we? Naruto was just settling into his 5th bowl of ramen, meaning he was just getting started good, when he felt 2 familiar chakra signatures behind him. Sigh, what do you want now? Sasuke and Sakura traded looks again. We want to know what's gotten into you, Dobi. Yeah, like Sasuke-kun said, you're not acting normal. Naruto took a moment to ponder this as he finished off bowl number 6. So basically, because I'm no longer being the smiling happy idiot you know, logically something is wrong with me? This time it was Sakura and Sasuke's turn to think for a moment. Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. Naruto sighed as he signaled for the owner of the ramen bar to bring his bill. Well, tough shit. I've been the smiling happy moron for long enough. I'm taking a day off. Just leave me alone and before you know it I'll be back, and you can go on pretending that everything is fine. It was then that Kakashi decided to make his appearance. Popping up in a cloud of smoke, he gave his usual long and drawn-out greeting. Yo! Sasuke and Sakura sweat dropped. Naruto on the other hand had just had his anger riled again. Wait, don't tell me. You're late today because you got lost on the road of life, while helping some old lady cross a street, after saving her poor pooch from rampaging S-class missing nins, who had started on fire the mime you were copying because you covered the wrong eye with your headband. Kakashi's sweat dropped as Naruto combined all of his usual excuses for being late into one long story. Yeah, something like that. Well, you and the other 2 morons can just piss off. I need a day to myself, and I have better things to do than listen to your lame-ass excuses. With that, Naruto once again stood. After dropping the correct amount of money for the food, Naruto left a generous tip for the ramen man's daughter and walked past the rest of his team, all of whom had their proverbial jaws on the floor. A couple of minutes after Naruto had left, teams 8 and 9 walked in and found them standing frozen. Kiba's voice was the first heard after a second or so of shock. What the hell happened here? Kakashi was the first person to snap out of it. Pulling out the book that he always kept with him, he simply said, Naruto. Kuronai and Asuma nodded sagely. I admit that I expected this long before now. I know exactly what you mean, Azuma. I had figured the kid would snap before he got out of the academy. Casting a critical eye around the interior of the ramen stand, Azuma ventured to add, I'm guessing that we really don't need to send anyone after him? The place is still intact, so I'm guessing that he didn't go AWOL. Kakashi shrugged and turned a page in his book. Nah, he'll be fine after a day or so. He just needs a little time to cool off. Kuronai and Azuma were nodding sagely again when suddenly they heard a shout just outside the door. So poor Naruto's shining flames of youth have been dimmed? We have no time to waste. We must cheer him and rekindle the burning spirit of his youth. Lee-san, your Jinni is overwhelming and your spirit burns with the fire of 1,000 suns. Surely you shall return the beacon of joy to Naruto's life. Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. The 11 people in the room sweat dropped and tried to tune out the 2 as Neji and Tenten came sliding in though the door. By this time Sasuke and Sakura and recovered and appeared to be considering their escape plan when the other 9 students walked over to chat. After Sasuke's betrayal of Leaf, Ino had rather lost interest in him and therefore the usual fighting between her and Sakura had fallen off. With nothing to keep them at each other's throats, the 2 had picked their friendship back up for another try. So, said Ino, what in the name of Kami-sama are they talking about? To everyone's surprise, it was Sasuke that answered. Damned if I know. For all I can gather, they've been expecting someone to go off the deep end. After a few moments of shocked silence, Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee, he said. What? It's not like I'm a mute. Another moment passed and then Shikamaru spoke up. Hey, where's Naruto? Yeah, where is that loudmouth? Said Choji. Normally he'd be demanding answers by now. He's not hurt again, is he? Asked Hinata. If he is, we should go visit him. Shino and Neji just sat and glared at each other. Neither was willing to admit it, but they each considered the other to be a close rival. Not surprising considering that their bloodlines pretty much cancelled each other out. Nah, said Kiba, he may be a moron, but he's tough. It'd have to be life-threatening to keep him from his ramen, And if it was, we would have heard of it by now. Sakura briefly sighed before filling them in on Naruto's odd behavior. So, our senseis are talking about him, huh? Said Shikamaru. Guess so, muttered Sasuke. Where's he at? Questioned Ino. Sakura gave her an odd look before answering. We don't know. He took off. About a minute later you guys came walking in. It was actually closer to 10. Said Ayame, the ramen man's daughter, as she picked up Naruto's bowls and the tip he left her. You just stood there like statues. With that she turned around and went back to work. Wow, what did he do? Say something intelligent? Laughed Kiba. Hinata frowned at that comment. She didn't much like insults. Especally insults directed toward Naruto. Well, said Neji, whatever we do, we need to take off soon. Those morons out front are going to start winding down any moment. It was then that the senseis spoke up. Oi, students. We've decided that you all probably need a little time off. If you haven't figured it out yet, Naruto's having a bit of a bid day and we figure that it's probably just the stress talking. Therefore you all have till tomorrow. After giving his speech Asuma glanced at Kurenai. She shrugged before adding, see you like normal tomorrow. The three Junin were about to leave when Kakashi stopped and turned around. Oh yeah, and I think that Naruto probably needs a little time alone. Therefore I advise all of you to just leave him be. He probably just needs some time to himself. With that all three disappeared in various puffs of smoke. Figures, muttered Sasuke. The Dobi decides to take a day off and they don't care. If I tried that I'd be running laps for a year. Yeah, said Ino, but he didn't try to betray his village. There was a brief pause and then. Sorry, I shouldn't have No, you had every right. Sigh, I admit that I made a very stupid mistake. I hope that sooner or later you will all be able to forgive me. Again there was silence, broken only by the sound of Guy and Lee yelling at each other. Damn, do those two ever stop? Neji and Tenten answered simultaneously. No, yes. They looked at each other for a minute before Neji sighed. They usually wind down after 20 minutes or so, but it feels like they never stop. So, what are we going to do about Naruto? Everyone stopped talking for a moment to look at Shino. Shifting uncomfortably under their gazes he spoke up again. What? You guys seem to be getting a little off track. Shit, muttered Kiba under his breath. The stress must be getting to us. First Sasuke volunteers an opinion, and now Shino is talking. What's next? Gaara hooking up with Tsunade-sama? Actually, said Sakura, they've been seeing each other for months now. Everybody's jaws hit the floor except Sakura's and Hinata's. Hinata giggled for a moment before adding. In an official capacity of course. Gaara is the new case cage. After everyone had reattached their lower jaws, Kiba spoke up again. So what now? He was suddenly ripped off his feet as a green blur passed through the room and out the door. The remaining genin heard a voice in the distance yelling. Now we find Naruto-san and show him the flames of our youth. Go Lee-san, make your sensei proud. And distantly, hey you fuzzy eyebrowed freak, let me go. Guys, help me. Akamaru whimpered and Hinata bent down to pick him up. Well, I guess that we're going to find Naruto-kun. With a mutual shrug, the rest of the genin began to follow the sounds of Kiba's cursing. Hyuga Hinata was in something of a bind. Almost 20 minutes ago the group of genin had decided that finding Naruto would be faster if they were to split up. Unknown to them, Hinata knew most of Naruto's favorite places to go. Currently Hinata was hiding in a small grove. Naruto was sitting on a stone at the top of a waterfall. He didn't appear to be focusing on anything in particular, and Hinata wasn't exactly sure how to approach him. Finally gathering her courage, Hinata was about to stand up when Naruto's head whipped around to look in the direction of the grove she was hiding in. How could he have known? I haven't even moved yet. Naruto opened his mouth, presumably to speak to Hinata, when a cursing gray and green streak stopped in front of him. Standing there in his good guy pose was Lee. Behind him stood a panting Kiba. Hands on his knees he barely managed to speak between long drawn-out breaths. Damn it Lee, wheeze. If you ever, wheeze, do that again I swear, wheeze, that you will not live, wheeze, to see the sun rise. Lee had about to begin his speech to Naruto, but at this comment her turned to Kiba. What is this Kiba-san? Don't tell me that our little jog through the village has dimmed the fire of UENTHUSASIUM already? Lee, wheeze, fuck you. Wheeze. Lee frowned at the comment his fellow shinobi had made. Now Kiba-san, why would you say something like that to your beloved fellow shinobe? Naruto had been watching this entire exchange with the air of a hunted animal. Heading off the impending argument, he asked in a quiet voice, "What are the two of you doing here?" This comment reminded Lee why he had come in the first place. Turning back toward Naruto, Lee struck his good guy pose again. "We have come to find out what is wrong with you. And once we have, we will rekindle the fires of your youth with our shining advice and sage-like wisdom." As Lee now had his back turned to Kiba, he didn't see the dark look and the finger that Kiba tossed to his back before turning to Naruto. "Alright, that idiot aside, we came to find out where you went and what is going on with you. Sasuke and Sakura said that you were acting a little bit odd and we wanted to know why." Naruto sighed in exasperation. He had come out here to avoid exactly that question. "Look guys, no offense, but like I told the Teme twins and that dipshit that I have for a teacher, I need a little time to myself. Just leave me alone and I'll be back to normal in no time." "I'm sorry Naruto-san, but we cannot allow you to wallow in your self-imposed exile. Stand and together we can rekindle the burning spirit of youth." "Well, although I don't quite share Lee's enthusiasm, he is right. We can't just leave you in whatever funk you've gotten yourself into. Come on Naruto, stand up and let's get back to the others." Incredulous Naruto looked from one face to the other. "Great, just fucking great. Normally everyone ignores me unless I'm being more annoying than usual, and now that I just want to be left alone they just won't leave. Look guys, I appreciate the gesture, but I really don't feel like talking. And on top of that," a little bit of a hurt edge entered his voice, "I would like you to leave before I say something that I will probably regret later." "Come now Naruto-san," yelled Lee, who had obviously not paid attention to a word Naruto just said. "We shall show you the burning passion that can only come from." At the same time Lee had spoken up, Kiba had also started speaking. "Look Naruto, I don't know what you said back there, but obviously it was pretty bad. Just come on back with us and the group of us can work this all you." "Silence," yelled Naruto. "For Kami's sake, can neither of you take no for an answer?" Sheesh, between Lee's jumpsuit screaming, "I'm gay," and Kiba's self-centeredness keeping him from getting a date, I feel like I'm talking to two brick walls. Naruto pinned the two of them in place with a glare. Both had their mouths open in shock. "What the hell is so wrong with wanting a little time to myself? Shit, doesn't smiling for you 24/7 entitle me to a day off now and again? I mean, for Kami's sake, I'm hated enough for something I have no control over, and now nobody will leave me alone long enough to keep a harness on my emotions. For pity's sake, just leave me alone, got it? Let me be." With that Naruto stood and strode off into the forest. Moments later Hinata left her shell-shocked fellow shinobi alone. She was already heading to Naruto's next most likely thinking place, and she couldn't help but wonder what was really wrong. Hinata watched as Naruto sighed again. She had made it to the top of the Hokage monument to find that Naruto was already sitting cross-legged on the head of the third, obviously deep in thought. That had been 20 minutes or so ago. Slowly she had been building up her courage again. "All right, I can do this. I'll just stand up and walk over. No need to be nervous. I'll walk over and ask if I can sit down, and then." Hinata got ready to stand up when again Naruto turned and looked right at her. There was no way he could know that she was there, but he seemed to see her anyway. Once again he opened his mouth, presumably to speak to her, when Ten, Neji and Ino walked out of the woods 10 feet to her left. "Naruto," yelled Ino. "We need to talk to you." Naruto had turned his head back to facing straight forward the moment the bushes had rustled, and now Hinata could see him visibly sigh. "What do you want, Ino? Don't you take that tone with me, Uzuma?" Ino was cut off by Ten. "We just want to know what's going on, Naruto. We saw your team. Apparently they were shell-shocked by something, and they mentioned you." "Yeah," said Ino, butting in rudely, "and we ran into Kiba and Lee just a couple of minutes ago. They wouldn't say anything. Lee just kept sobbing something about his suit being the height of fashion, and Kiba just looked ready to bite something." Naruto turned his head ever so slightly. He wasn't looking at them, but they could now see a slight profile of his face rather than just the back of his head. "That's odd, though Ten. I'd swear he was far older than I know he is. I don't know why, but he looks ancient and tired." Ino on the other hand was having none of this no-answer bullshit. "Well, are you going to answer or not?" Naruto's head turned just a fraction more before he whispered just loudly enough to be heard. They wouldn't leave me alone. I asked them. Hell, I damn near pleaded with them to just let me be. They refused. I warned them to go before I said something that I'd regret. They just wouldn't leave me be, and I kind of lost my temper. Naruto had turned all the way around by now and his eyes were pleading. Please, please, just leave me be. I'll be fine by tomorrow. I just need some time for myself. This time it was Neji that spoke. So you finally feel the weight of destiny, him? You are finally bowing to the inevitable? Neji had intended to get a rise out of Naruto. He had thought that anything would be better than the quiet pain in Naruto's eyes. He was wrong. Luckily for them, Ino and Tenten were just out of Naruto's line of sight. It was also lucky that they were out of his way. To Hinata, Naruto seemed to just disappear, and after a moment's scanning she found out where he had gone. Naruto was now standing where Neji had been moments before. Neji himself, despite being almost 2 inches taller than Naruto and nearly 20 pounds heavier, was being suspended by the front of his shirt. As I said before, it was lucky that the other girls couldn't see Naruto's eyes because they now flamed with an intensity that bordered on insanity. Never, Naruto hissed through clenched teeth, preach to me about destinies. I have been fighting mine since I was old enough to walk, and I'll be damned before I let someone like you tell me when I should give up. There was another second's pause while the girls figured out where Naruto had gone before. Naruto, you drop him this instant. Yes, let go of Neji-san. You don't know what he's gone though. The girls had no idea what had brought this on, but they could see Neji suspended 3 inches off the ground, and though they couldn't see Naruto's face, they could certainly see Neji's. Slowly Naruto turned his head away from Neji. The girls could see that something had terrified the Hyuga genius, and considering how unemotional he usually was, it must have been bad, but they were nowhere near prepared for Naruto's eyes. You have no idea what I've gone though. Do you care? No. It's always Neji or Sasuke. Why is it never Naruto? The girls were too scared to reply. Naruto's beautiful blue eyes, the eyes that had always held such compassion and humor, had gone cold. Where they had been warm, they could now freeze winter's heart. Where they had been kind, they could now strike sparks off of steel. Why is it that no matter how hard I tried to get attention before, you all just ignored or insulted me? Why is it that now, when I only want to be left alone, I cannot find the quiet I need to tame my temper? Isn't smiling enough? What do I have to do to be acknowledged? I beat your genius Neji. I brought back everyone's precious Sasuke. Why is it that I still get those damnably cold eyes? Wasn't stopping Gaara enough? Shouldn't risking life and limb constantly count for something? While Naruto had started hard and cold, he was now close to crying. Realizing that this could be taken for weakness, it's how he was raised, Naruto visibly steadied himself. Naruto spit on the ground. You all disgust me. Neji with his self-pity and predetermined fate bullshit, Ino with her Sasuke obsession and fashion fads, and Tenten with her inability to do anything but follow the crowd. Naruto tossed Neji into the dirt. I'm leaving. If you see the rest of those idiots, tell them to leave me be. I was sick of this when I woke up, and I'll be sick of it when I go to bed. Hopefully, however, you people will let me cool down now. With that, Naruto turned and walked away. Again, Hinata sat with a thoughtful look on her face. A picture was beginning to come together, and the more she thought about it, the more their senseis seemed right. Hinata was also surprised that this snap hadn't come sooner. Looking around and realizing that he was nowhere in view again, Hinata slipped away to his next hiding spot. Once again, Hinata found herself watching Naruto. Where before she hadn't approached him out of nervousness, this time she was studying him. It wasn't all that hard if you knew where to look. On the other hand, very few people knew Naruto enough to look in the right places. Focusing upward, Hinata stared through the tree behind her and up to the top of the tree next to it. Naruto was sitting in the upper branches, apparently lost in thought. Sighing, Hinata deactivated her Byakugan. What is it that you see up there, Naruto? I've been watching you for at least 20 minutes, what do you see? What is it that has caused this sadness that always seems to hide behind your eyes? This sadness that masks itself with your smile. Reactivating her Byakugan, Hinata took another look Naruto. For once he wasn't smiling. In fact, he sat with a small frown on his face. It was odd for Hinata to see him without that trademark grin. But in some ways she liked the Naruto that she was watching now much better than the one she usually saw. He seemed more real. Somehow, without his ever-present smile, Naruto seemed to be real in a manner Hinata had never quite been able to see before. Hinata frowned slightly. It's odd, but when I could only see the pain I found it attractive. I had found someone who had what I wanted, the perfect mask. Now that I see him without the mask, that look, that lonely expression. I'm no longer nervous, in fact instead of wanting to be his girlfriend I wish only to help him. Hinata's frown deepened a little. But I do like him, don't I? Isn't this the same Naruto that I have watched since I first met him? Why is it that I, the only person to see behind the mask, am also seeing Naruto-kun in a new light? Is this wrong? Am I really that shallow? Hinata was still struggling with that question when she caught sight of Choji, Shikamaru, and Shino walking into the far side of the clearing. Oddly enough, just as he had the times before, Naruto suddenly started and looked directly at the spot where Hinata was hiding. Once again his frown deepened, and he looked as though he was about to say something. Unfortunately for him, Shikamaru had caught sight of him while staring at the clouds. "Ohoyo Naruto." Startled, Naruto's head snapped around to stare at the three newcomers. Hinata hadn't thought it possible, but Naruto's frown deepened even further. With a very obvious sign, Naruto looked down at the three genin on the ground before calling out. "I don't suppose that telling you to go away right now would matter to you? Sigh, so troublesome." "No, not really. Ino, Sakura, and Tenten are all after me to have a chat with you. If one female wasn't troublesome enough, three is certainly too many to ignore." Naruto shifted his gaze to the other two shinobi. "I assume that the two of you have similar difficulties?" Choji grimaced, his bag of chips conspicuous in their absence. "Ino swore she'd burn every restaurant in town if I didn't. Besides, she had my poor lovely chips held hostage." Naruto sighed and shook his head before looking expectantly at Shino. "And you, Shino? What did they threaten you with?" For a moment Shino appeared not to have heard, and then ever so slowly one eyebrow rose. "What makes you think that I was ordered here? My bugs have been reporting your suppressed frustration to me since we first met. To be honest, I'm surprised that you lasted as long as you did. I came to tell you that it's time to calm down a bit. You've agitated pretty much everyone you know already today, and I want you to stop kicking the hive." Choji stared open-mouthed at the reclusive Abroom, and Shikamaru muttered a quiet, "troublesome." Shino spotted their reactions. "Because I usually choose not to speak does not mean I am incapable." Sighing, Naruto lay back against the tree and stared back up at the sky. "Look guys, I really do appreciate the fact that everyone is trying to look out for me, but to be honest I really just want to be left alone. I wouldn't have kicked the hive, as you put it, if they would have taken my warnings and left before I lost my temper." "I can't blame you, Naruto," said Shikamaru, "but frankly dragging you back to the women will be much less troublesome than convincing them to leave you alone." Shino looked up expectantly while Choji nodded empathetically in the background. With another sigh, Naruto leapt out of the tree and caught himself lightly on the ground. "Alright, if it sets their minds at ease I can show up for a moment or two. Maybe I can even convince them to leave me alone." Shikamaru looked slightly uneasy for some reason. Naruto was about to comment on it when Choji spoke up again. "Good, we head back, you give a quick apology for whatever it was you said, the girls give my food back, and everyone walks away happy." Choji started walking toward where the girls, and the rest of the genin, waited, but he stopped a moment later when he realized that Naruto hadn't twitched a muscle since his comment. Looking back, Choji watched with mild interest and Naruto slowly spun to face Shikamaru. "Apology? You said nothing about apologizing." Shifting uncomfortably under Naruto's gaze, Shikamaru gave a short, fake cough before answering. "I may have forgotten to mention that all of the girls are requesting that you apologize for whatever it was you said to them." Naruto had been fairly certain he had gotten his emotions under control in the half-hour since his last encounter. Without realizing it, Shikamaru had just given Naruto the one thing that was still likely to push him off of the razor's edge that we call sanity. "Apologize? Apologize? I wouldn't apologize to those children, if it makes the sun rise in the west tomorrow. I meant every word I said, and I'll be damned before I recant on a single word of it." It was then that Choji decided to act. Running up behind Naruto, he attempted to pin Naruto's arms to his side by using a family jutsu that was similar to the meat tank. The difference being that instead of burning fat to increase his size, he burned it to increase his strength. "Okay guys, I've got him. Come tie him up and let's get going." Luckily for himself, Naruto got over his shock rather quickly. This was unfortunate for Choji, however. Sorry buddy, I owe you a bowl of ramen for this. Saying that, Naruto stepped down as hard as he could on Choji's left foot. Surprised Naruto would do that, Choji's grip loosened ever so slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. With agility that none of his fellow shinobi had expected, Naruto dropped straight down and slid out from under Choji's attack. Rolling, Naruto jumped up behind him and, before he could react, delivered a chopping blow to the side of Choji's neck. He crumpled like a rag doll, drifting off into a deep slumber. I'll have to remember to thank Ba-chan for showing me that move. Once again Shikamaru sighed and muttered, troublesome. Alright, Shino, plan 2. Less than 10 seconds later Naruto found himself paralyzed while watching a swarm of insects headed his direction. I really hate to do it this way, apologized Shikamaru, but I just can't go back to those women empty-handed. I'd much rather them take it out on you. By now Naruto was more than just a little bit pissed. Shikamaru, you have exactly 1 second to let me go. Shikamaru quirked an eyebrow. Or you'll do what exactly? It's not like you can escape me. Naruto snarled. You were warned. Kyuubi, what do you want, you little rat? I need the smallest fraction of your power. For what, you pathetic little worm? There are no enemies nearby, only packmates. They are trying to usurp my place and hand me over to the vixens. That can be quite enjoyable, kid. Baka, not for that. They are demanding I humble myself because I spoke the truth. This is a fight you should win on your own, moron. It is hard to fight 2 packmates at once when they jump you unexpectedly. At this comment Kyuubi's lip curled backward in a low snarl. This was the closest Naruto had ever seen Kyuubi come to laughing. Fine, but know now that I only do this because I refuse to bow to anyone. On the outside Shikamaru and Shino had watched Naruto close his eyes. In less than a second he opened them again, but they were change. Unlike all time prior, Kyuubi hadn't just poured out all the chakra that Naruto could handle. This time Kyuubi had given Naruto just enough to match his already impressive chakra. There was no lengthening of Naruto's nails, no real change in his teeth. The only things that the 2 other ninja really noticed were that Naruto's eyes had gone from his regular blue to a reflective yellow, and the fact that his ears were now slightly pointed. I warned you. Naruto may not have been a genius, but he was far from stupid. Shikamaru may have been able to control his body normally, but as everyone knows, if you force more chakra into your limbs, you become far stronger. Shikamaru's jutsu worked by snaring his opponent, and then using chakra to infuse his entire muscle network, helping him control the target. In this case it was unfortunate for him that Naruto had just been infused with Yuki. For half a second the 2 of them stared at each other, and then Naruto calmly began walking forward. For all of 2 seconds Shikamaru's mind raced as he tried to figure out exactly what was happening. When he realized that Naruto had somehow figured out the basic principle behind the shadow bind, he had done no such thing initially, but had realized it when Shikamaru started to mimic him instead. Shikamaru quickly released his hold. Shino now. Looking up, Naruto noticed that the bugs that had been hovering at a distance up until now were all diving at him. Now Naruto liked to spar. In fact, there were very few of his friends that he had not fought with at one point or another. Naruto had only managed to fight Shino twice to date. The first time Naruto had concentrated on fire jutsus. The second time on wind and water attacks. This time, however, Naruto was ready. He had been waiting for an opportunity to test a theory he had about Shino's bugs. Growling, Naruto reached out and captured Shino with his now slightly purple chakra. Call them off. Shino stared impassively, that is until one of Naruto's hand burst into flame and the other began collecting frost. Call them off or I will snuff them like moths caught in a flame. Shino paled. Up until now he had always assumed that his bugs had no real weakness, but Naruto had just pointed out the flaw in his reasoning. You see, Shino had always managed to block jutsu by altering the chemical composition in the shells of the bugs before sending them out. Usually he kept a decent mix of bugs, each immune to a different form of attack, but this new combination of both fire and ice had taken him completely by surprise. If Naruto attacked with one or the other, Shino would have had no problem, but with both, sending out a mental command, Shino shivered at the thought of his precious bugs being frozen and cooked at the same time. Slowly the bugs retreated until, once again, they were nowhere to be seen. Why is it? Growled Naruto as he let go of the Kyuubi's chakra. That when all I want is a little attention you people do nothing but ignore me at the worst, or tolerate me at the best. Why is it that the moment I'd finally welcome some time to myself you people just won't leave me alone? Look Naruto, began Shikamaru. I don't know what it is you've said to anybody. All I know is that whatever it was it shocked the whole lot of them. Nobody will say what you said, but from the looks they gave me when I asked, it was like a slap to the face. Sighing Naruto summoned up some water and dumped it on Choji waking him near instantly. I said nothing to them that shouldn't have been said a long time ago. I admit that there was probably more tactful ways to phrase it, but they pissed me off, and my mouth just kind of said it. Look Naruto, interjected Shino. You really can't be letting your anger get the better of you. He's right, added Choji. I don't know what you said, but I do believe that you angered pretty much everyone. Look, said Naruto getting angry again. I have the right to my opinion, and I have the right to express that opinion. Hell, all of you have constantly told me exactly what you think my flaws are. Whether it's Shino's muttering about that eyesore in orange, Shikamaru's whining about that troublesome loud mouth, or Choji's comments about that ramen hog, all I did was return the favor. Naruto noticed with some satisfaction that all three of his fellow ninja were now shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. What, did you think that I couldn't hear you? I'm not stupid you know. Having nobody to talk to means that you listen a whole lot better. After a rather uncomfortable pause Shikamaru spoke up again. That was all in the past. We can't change it, you however can alter the present, so, a quick apology and then we can. At the same time Choji had spoken up. Well, it was true. Sure you left all of the better food for the rest of us but. Oddly enough Shino had also started trying to defend himself. It's true I tell you, those clothing stand out like a sore thumb, if you just consent to something a little less. Whatever Naruto had expected, it wasn't what any of these three were saying. Somewhere in the back of his mind Naruto had almost hoped that these three would be intelligent enough to just go away. Hearing them try to rationalize their actions put Naruto's temper through the roof again. Will you all just shut up? Stunned at the anger shining through those piercing blue eyes all three of them fell silent again. When Naruto started speaking it was in that deceptively calm voice. It was the first time that any of them had ever had it directed at them, and to be honest all three of them could hear the suppressed anger that hid in it. I don't want your apologies today. I don't want you to rationalize to me, and I sure as hell am not going to apologize for anything that I've said. All I want is to be left alone. When the three nins all started their protests again Naruto's temper flowed back up to that uncontrollable level. What the hell is wrong with you all? I made a civil request, and I at least attempted to show you every courtesy. I was unfailingly polite and all three of you have just thrown my attempt back in my face. Do you want to know what I said to the rest? I told them a couple of truths about themselves that I've noticed over the years. My temper is hanging by a silk thread at the moment. So don't push me, or you'll find out firsthand. Hinata was still sitting out of sight behind the tree. She had watched everything with her Byakugan, and it hadn't exactly been hard to hear them. At this point she was just hoping that they would be smart enough to keep quiet. They weren't. You watch what you say, said Shikamaru, his own temper flaring for the first time in years. We're your peers and we deserve your respect. Hinata was tempted to stop watching right there. It might not have been so bad if it had only been Shikamaru who felt that way. If even one of the other two had disagreed. Hinata was ashamed to note however that the other two were nodding in agreement. Hinata closed her eyes, not that it mattered with the Byakugan active. Respect? Respect? What have any of you done to deserve my respect today? Or even in the last week? Bloody hells below. If you really want to piss me off so bad you could have said so. At this point Choji made the stupid mistake of trying to say something, and Hinata winced in sympathy as the full weight of Naruto's glare was directed at him. Shut up Chouji. You want to be first? Fine, here's some truth for you. For all your protests that you're just big-boned, you are overly fat. Shikamaru winced at this comment expecting Choji to blow up. Oddly he just sat there with his mouth hanging open. If you took just half a minute you'd realize that it's not fat that you need, it's muscle. Your jutsus burn through your body's energy. But it burns muscle much slower than fat therefore more muscle mass equals more energy to burn. Now Hinata's sympathies lay with Shino, who was the new target of Naruto's icy glare. And you, for all your aloof attitude I can see past it. You are just as insecure as any of the other genin, and just as overly confident as Neji. You were shocked today when you found that I had a counter for your bugs. That much anyone could see. What they couldn't see is that without those bugs you are powerless. You train your bugs exclusively, without training yourself. Has it ever occurred to you that there may come a time when they are rendered useless? What if I had summoned a toad? What would you have done then? And finally Naruto's gaze turned to Shikamaru, where it blazed even brighter. But now Naruto didn't shout. His voice dropped to a venomous hissing whisper that was many times worse than his shouting had ever been. Last but not least, we have our genius. For all your protests that everything is too troublesome, you seem to have overlooked the simple fact that the faster you get everything done, the longer you have to rest peacefully rather than being yelled at all the time. Do you know what else? I think you like it. I honestly believe that you enjoy the attention that Ino gives you. Do you know why I think that? I think that because otherwise you would have realized the exact same things about her that I did, and you would have mentioned them. Because anyone smart enough is willing to shut up and change when confronted by an inexcusable truth when it isn't complimentary. I also learned something else about you just today. No matter how smart you think you are, you have no clue when it's a good time to shut the hell up and leave a person alone. With that final comment, Naruto turned on his heel and stalked away. Hinata continued watching just long enough to have a good idea where he was headed before deactivating her blood limit. Sighing, she stood up again and walked toward Naruto's next thinking spot. All the while her mind racing furiously. Something about Naruto had changed in her mind, she just couldn't quite figure out what. In fact, Naruto had noticed them. He was also rather disappointed. For the first time ever, Naruto would have actively welcomed a fight against a worthy opponent. Unfortunately, even from the onset he had been sadly disappointed by the lack of finesse. It had taken all of 2 seconds for Naruto to become bored with the fight. After that he had simply let his body move on its own. From a sitting position Naruto had managed to easily beat all 4, and all the while he had sat and meditated on why everyone had taken such an interest in him all of a sudden. It had come as a bit of a revelation to him. He had been walking through the crowds hoping that someone would pick a fight when he noticed a blonde civilian staring at him as he passed. She had been about his age, and the only reason that Naruto had noticed at all was because she had exactly zero interest in him until her mother had warned the girl to stay away from him because he was dangerous. The moment her mother had said that, the girl immediately took notice in him. In fact, Naruto could have sworn she had followed him for nearly 4 blocks. Hey, and if that wasn't odd enough, even after everyone else left the park I could have sworn that I saw her and about 7 other girls pointing at me and giggling. I wonder what they found so funny. Hinata hadn't even noticed Naruto's other followers, nor did she see the group that was standing just out of range of her Byakugan. If she had, she may have wondered what 10 girls were doing looking through a pair of binoculars and giggling. She also might have noticed that the giggling, and even some blushing, increased when Naruto ran a hand through his hair, making his already messy mop of hair even more, stylishly, messy. Hinata had been sitting and watching Naruto for nearly 40 minutes when she suddenly put her head in her hands and groaned. She hadn't forgotten a meal, and no, she wasn't out past curfew. Even though the sun was beginning to set. No, this was far worse than anything that her father could threaten her with. Just at the edge of her Byakugan she had spotted a group of people. Of all the people in the world, it was this group that Hinata would have wanted to see last. It was in fact the entirety of the Rookie 9 and Guy's team. In fact, the only people missing were Hinata and Naruto himself. Hinata was still too far away to hear anything, but from what she could read of Ino's rant, it was pretty obviously a rant. The entire group had decided that Naruto had unjustly slandered them. Instead of taking a hint and leaving Naruto alone, they had obviously come to give Naruto a piece of their minds. Naruto couldn't see them yet, nor could they see him. For a brief moment Hinata had considered jumping up to warn Naruto to leave, but the very moment she had made that decision Naruto had suddenly sat up as though startled, and looked right at her. It was really unnerving because he had been doing that all day. Every time she had been about to make herself known he had looked right at her. How is he doing that? It lasted only a fraction of a minute, but just as Naruto opened his mouth to speak, again, the entire group caught sight of him. Even in her hiding place Hinata winced to the twin screeches of, "There you are," from Ino and Sakura. Immediately Naruto had turned away from her. For a brief moment a flicker of a smile seemed to have shown on his face, but almost as quickly it was gone. To Hinata, who almost wondered if she had imagined it, he seemed to have attempted to throw up his plastic smile. He failed miserably. HMMPH. Those two are like a pair of harpies, how on earth do Naruto and Sasuke stand them? Seconds later the newly christened harpies swooped down on our poor Naruto, followed shortly by the entire group. Who do you think you are talking to me, lick? I'll have you know that fat gives energy faster, duh. I'm not Sasuke obsessed, and I'll have you know that my clothes are height of fashion. Guy Sensei assures, due to train myself as well as my bugs, is a near immutable force, the effort required to change it is. Troublesome women will just find something else too. Sick of you thinking you're anywhere near my level, you just got lucky and of women. Furthermore, I'll have you know that I am not stuck. I'm very independent. How do you think that I got so good with my throwing? Throughout all of this Naruto just sat still, back leaning against the tree and apparently asleep. Hinata almost giggled to herself. The scene, as seen from her point of view, made Naruto look like the calm adult in a sea of whining children. An odd switch, as it was usually Naruto acting younger than his 14 years. It took a moment or two for everyone to realize that Naruto was apparently paying exactly zero attention to them. And considering whom it was they were ranting at, this only served to make the group more angry. It was Shikamaru who finally managed to shut everyone up. Even then he had to resort to his shadow bind. After a moment's struggle everyone stopped fighting and quieted down. Before catching sight of him they had determined the order they intended to approach him in, but seeing him had apparently driven all thought of it from their minds. It was Sakura who had gotten the first approach, mainly because it was an open secret that Naruto had a major crush on her. Naruto. Naruto, are you listening to me? Damn it Uzumaki, you wake up right now and heard every word Haruno. This phrase shocked the entire group into silence. Never, not in all the years that he had known her, had Naruto ever called her anything but Sakura-chan. Now he had insulted her twice in one day. You feel that I don't have the right to talk to you like I have been. You feel that as my teammate you deserve all the respect and attention that I can possibly give you. You are after all the one person I had a crush on, therefore you have the right to ignore me while demanding total respect. Uchiha is pissed because once again I have managed to do something that he can only hope to do sometime in the future. I have managed to up and take a day off with absolutely no consequences. He's also pissed because he feels indebted to me for saving his sorry ass from that pedophilic snake, but being the ice-cold asshole that he is, he hopes that he can just save me from something rather than thanking me, something you have never done either, Sakura. Shino is ticked because he gets up to go for a 1-mile jog every morning followed by a half-hour of taijutsu practice with his father. Even though he's never put any effort into it, he feels that it counts as training his body. Ino is pissed off because I managed to strike a nerve with my comment about her obsessions, and is trying to ignore the fact that I'm right simply because she no longer has a crush on Sasuke. 1010 is mad because I claimed that she does nothing but follow the crowd. She feels that this is an unjust accusation because she is the only Kunoichi in your little group that takes her job as a ninja seriously. What she fails to understand is that training does not make you unique, it simply means you understand the dangers better and so you prepare for them. It was about here that the people Naruto had been taking about tried to take up their protests again. Naruto silenced them by raising a single hand, a trick he had picked up by watching Ikrua. It was similar to Orochimaru's killer intent technique, except that instead of radiating fear you radiate authority. Just wait, I'm not finished yet. Choji's argument is that fat has more energy than muscle. He makes this argument while conveniently ignoring the fact that the energy from fat is quickly expended, meaning that if you don't end the fight quickly you're toast. Kiba is mad because despite my comment, he is quite good at attracting civilian women. What he is ignoring is the fact that never once has one of them agreed to a second date. Mainly because he spends all night taking about how great he is. Lee is angry because even though his sensei assures him that his gay-looking tights are the height of fashion, he has never seen anyone else in town wearing them, and has wondered why. Neji is angry because I blew up at him for the biting comment he made to me about the fate bullshit that he still believes in. Even though he now believes that you can influence it, he still doesn't believe that fate can be changed. Last but not least, Shikamaru is angry because I'm not showing him the respect deserved by his position. He also feels slightly insulted because I The Dobi managed to point out certain truths that he was very carefully hiding from himself. He also feels that accomplishing his tasks fast will make people expect even more from him rather than leaving him in peace. He believes this even while realizing that if he simply warns people that he only intends to do what he was ordered to do and to then disappear when finished, he can get away with a minimum of fuss. Finishing his calm and collected statement, Naruto once again leaned back against the tree and, once again, for all intents and purposes he appeared to be asleep. Back in the shelter, Hinata was fighting a losing battle. The scene she had just witnessed was just too funny. There sat Naruto, calmly leaning against a tree beside the lake, and all around him stood his fellow shinobi, their mouths hanging open in disbelief. Hinata wished that she had a camera. The picture would have been priceless. Just when she didn't think she could stop herself from laughing aloud any longer, something happened that took her from greatly amused to stone sober in a heartbeat. In a single motion, Sasuke drew a kunai and threw it as hard as he could at Naruto. Hinata's heart skipped a beat until Naruto, with a singular fluid grace, reached out and plucked the kunai out of the air. All without opening his eyes. There was a moment of tension and then, "What was that for?" asked an amused Naruto as he opened one eye to look directly at Sasuke. "Who are you?" grated Sasuke harshly as he drew another blade. The Dobi would never have insight like that. Not to mention the fact that he's nowhere near good enough with kunai to pull the stunt you just did. Sasuke's words seemed to ring true in the other genin as well. The words were barely out of his mouth when the rest of them fell into battle stances while drawing their various weapons. Wearily opening his other eye and looking at the ring of pointy steel that now surrounded him, Naruto slowly got to his feet, even as the rest of the genin took half a step back. "What the hell is your problem, Teme? I am, and always will be, Naruto. If you wanted a spar you could have just waited till tomorrow. You're not Naruto. I've thought that you were acting funny since this morning, but now you've made it abundantly clear that you're not him. The Naruto I know has probably never had a serious moment in his life." Naruto sighed. In the background he could hear Kyuubi laughing faintly. After all the years he had hid behind his smile, he was finally showing his true feelings, and now they thought him someone else. "What did I do to deserve this? You are one of those stupid apes. That should be enough. Shut up, you baka fox." For whatever reason, Kyuubi found this comment singularly funny, and to the shinobi watching him, Naruto's eyes suddenly went glassy. Naruto himself was transported into a room that closely resembled a library, or at least the study in a rather well-to-do house. If his arrival wasn't enough to shock him, the sight of a young-looking, and rather handsome, man dressed all in red, black, and gold was. Especially because said young man was currently kneeling on the floor while tightly holding his ribs. The man looked to be laughing so hard he was nearly crying. "Okay, what the bloody hell is going on? And who the hell are you?" asked Naruto as he reached for his kunai pouch. Hearing this, the man straightened up just long enough to look Naruto in the eye and say, "Naruto, I am your father." Then the man broke down again, this time laughing so hard that really did start crying. Needless to say, Naruto was more than a little bit pissed at this point. He was mad for several reasons, the first being that this man was obviously having a laugh at his expense. Naruto didn't believe that this pointy-faced rouge of a man was his father. Secondly, wherever he was, Naruto couldn't find his weapons. And finally, because this seemed to be one more person who was determined to tick him off today. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, Naruto did his best to calm down as he waited for this stranger to stop laughing. After what seemed like an hour, the man finally managed to stop chuckling long enough to get his breath. Naruto watched with mild interest as the man summoned an overstuffed armchair apparently out of nowhere and sat down while still chuckling quietly to himself. Naruto waited for the man to finish, and when he did, Naruto spoke up. "Alright, we seem to have gotten off to a bad start. Let's try again. Hello, I'm Uzumaki Naruto." "You are?" The man looked ready to break out laughing again, but instead settled for flashing an amused smile before answering. "They call me Yuki no Kyuubi. Kyuubi will do if you like." Naruto took a moment to study the man's face, certain that this had to be another joke of some kind. When the man gave no indication of being anything other than completely serious, Naruto felt he had no choice but to at least pretend to take the man at his word. Okay. So, Kyuubi, what am I doing here?" "The same thing you usually do when I drag you here. You're about to beg me in your rather unique way to give you some of my power." If Naruto had only thought the man crazy before, he had no doubt now that whoever this guy was, he was insane. Naruto opened his mouth to say as much, but the odd-looking man cut him off. "No, don't bother speaking, I can see that you don't believe me." For a moment the scene seemed to shift to the familiar look of a water-filled hallway dominated by a large nine-tailed fox in a cage. This impression lasted only a moment before it flickered back to the man in the chair. Only now the man had grown fox ears and 9 furry tails. Shocked, Naruto stumbled backwards. Obviously something terrible had happened. Kyuubi was free of his bonds. "Oh, give it a rest, kid. Your rather interesting father knew what he was doing when he sealed me." Seeing the look of disbelief apparent on Naruto's face, Kyuubi suddenly sprang forward with a snarl. Naruto's eyes widened for a moment before Kyuubi was pulled up short. A golden collar with the same kanji as the seal on the gate had appeared and stopped him inches away from slashing Naruto's face. This demonstrated Kyuubi calmly turned and walked back to his chair. Shrugging, he looked at Naruto. "I figured that if you were going to finally drop the mask I could at least stop terrorizing you in your own mind. Although I do have to admit that I found the play of emotions you displayed to be quite entertaining. Anyway, kid, get out and leave me be for a while." With that, Kyuubi's chakra seemed to seep up out of the very floor, wrapping itself around him. Just as Naruto left, he seemed to hear the Kyuubi mutter, "How I'm going to miss screwing with his mind." Back in the real world, Sasuke and the other shinobi were beginning to get a little bit worried. Obviously they had cornered someone very powerful. They would have sent someone for backup, but anyone leaving could be seen as a show of weakness, therefore it was far too dangerous to risk anything of the sort. The tension had gotten even worse when the imposter suddenly went blank and seemed to sag into himself. Although Sasuke didn't say so aloud, it seemed obvious to him that the man was preparing an exceptionally powerful attack. Activating his eyes, Sasuke was the first person to throw when Naruto's head suddenly whipped up. Hinata could only cry out in horror as every single one of the gathered genin had released at almost the exact same moment, and all of them were aiming to kill. There was only a fraction of a second, a brief moment of time in which to act. Even as Hinata threw herself out of the shelter in a futile attempt to intercept the kunai, shrunken, and various other sharp pointy pieces of metal, Naruto was reacting. In a burst of red chakra that threw back the 10 people surrounding him, and froze Hinata, Naruto managed to deflect all of the weapons. After another moment in which no one moved, Sasuke spoke up in a slightly odd voice. "How do you do that, Dobi? Every time I'm certain you're beat, you always manage to summon that red chakra." Obviously all of the genin now believed him. It would have been hard not to, considering the fact that he was the only person they knew of that could summon such an aura. Chuckling darkly, Naruto replied, "Why so interested now, Teme? We have been teammates for almost 2 years, and this is the first time you've noticed?" "Oh, don't bother answering. I realize that this is only the 3rd time I've ever done this that you know of. But I think that the signs that I'm not what I appear to be would have shown up long since, and yet you and Sakura never seem to notice. Any guesses why? Anyone? No? Well then I'll answer myself. Sakura has never noticed because she's been too wrapped up with you. The great, medic Enin of our team has been too busy following you around and watching your every move to so much as notice when I injure myself. Rather funny considering the number of times I've saved her ass, isn't it? She didn't notice how fast I healed from Haku's wounds. She ignored the fact that I was gravely injured while fighting Gaara to save her, even though I know you told her the truth. And best of all, she didn't even notice the gaping hole in my chest when I brought you back. You on the other hand have been too busy brooding over your brother and denying your feelings for Sakura to even notice how hard I worked to catch up to you. It wasn't until I had finally beaten Haku that you deigned to see me, and even then you decided that it was a fluke. The both of you are pitiful excuses of human beings, and it has been my unique displeasure to know either of you. Teammates? Faye. More like weights around my neck. Naruto had just turned to walk away when Sasuke's voice caught up to him again. And what about you? What reason would we have to notice you? All you ever do is talk about ramen and being Hokage. And where does this power come from? You can't tell me it's normal. No amount of hard work could allow you to change the very color and feel of the chakra you emit. Naruto hunched his shoulders as though he had received a blow, and then, ever so slowly, spun back to face Sasuke. His eyes focused on the ground, and hidden by his hair. The demonic aura long since faded to nothing. I told you before, Sasuke, said Naruto, his voice a very audible whisper. This power of mine is a curse. A curse no one should have to bear, yet I do. I bear it and I fight it. It has ruined my life since the day I was born and I wish for nothing as much as I wish to be rid of it. Nearly screaming in his frustration, Sasuke replied. Then give it to me. Power like that cannot be a burden. It can have no downside. You know as well as I do that might makes right. He who is strongest is the most fit to lead. He who is strongest makes the rules. Naruto's eyes suddenly turned cold, colder than they ever had before, while at the same time they went dead. Naruto, in a voice that seemed to come from beyond the grave, answered. Is that what you really believe, Sasuke? That power is everything? If your family believed that, then I can see why Itachi killed them. Nobody that stupid should be allowed to live, and in fact by your very arguments Itachi had every right to do what he did. He was stronger than they, therefore whatever he decided to do to them was justified. Right? With an inarticulate cry Sasuke flung himself at Naruto. The other 7 people in the group watched in shock as Sasuke's hands closed around Naruto's throat and started to choke the life out of him. All the while sobbing, "You have no right to speak to me like that. I don't know what you did to gain this power of yours, but I would make the same sacrifice 1,000 times over to have the power that seems to come so naturally to you. Why is it you that is so blessed?" Naruto, whose eyes had been drooping a moment before due to lack of oxygen, suddenly snapped awake again. Out of nowhere his aura sprang back, wreathing him in a glow red as blood and intense as all the hatred that had ever been directed at him. Seemingly without effort he picked up Sasuke and threw him backwards. Blessed? Blessed. I have paid for this power in everything I have and everything I am. What I have paid in sweat, blood, and tears is more than anyone should have to pay. Only a fool would pay the price once, let alone 1,000 times over. Do you know what it's like to have nobody? No parent? No sibling? Nobody to love or look after? Do you know what it's like to be a directionless child in a world where parents curse you and drag their children away? To be completely and utterly alone for the first 7 years of your life? To be forced to watch others your age run and laugh, playing games and making friends while realizing that it is something you can never do? Do you have any idea what it's like to have assassination attempts made against you on a regular basis every fucking week? What, you never knew that? Of course not. You never saw it even when it occurred during our training sessions. Do you know what it is like, to be alone? Naruto stood there exhausted. Even as the aura he was projecting flickered and died, he stood his ground. He stood, tired both mentally and physically, waiting for something to break the silence. What is this curse? Ponderously Naruto managed to raise his eyes to meet those of his longtime crush. Even as Sakura watched, Naruto seemed to age, his eyes showing a world weariness that came only to those that had seen too much. Sakura was frozen in place, as those dead eyes suddenly seemed to look right through her, measuring her to the last inch, and weighing her to the final ounce. After an indeterminate length of time Naruto spoke again. Are you certain, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that you really want to know the answer to that question? Sakura hesitated only a moment, worried about what she had seen in her teammates' eyes. It was only the briefest of moments though before she answered. Yes. For the gathered genin what came next was as short as it was shocking. I am the container for Kyuubi. It took a moment for her to process it, but when she did Sakura's eyes suddenly went wide and she took a step back. Sakura-chan, please, I would never. Don't come any closer, you monster. Naruto recoiled as though slapped. He couldn't claim that he hadn't seen it coming, but to hear her say it aloud, turning Naruto fled, right across the surface of the lake. Reaching the center he suddenly collapsed to his knees, sobbing. What happened next was so unexpected that even years later it was still spoken of in a sort of reverent awe. Hinata, suddenly breaking out of the trance that interplay of Team 7 had put her in, strode forward. She stopped briefly in front of Sakura, and then, before anyone could react, slapped her hard enough to throw her 4 feet backward. Without saying a word, Hinata walked over to the lake. The other genin watched, mesmerized, as she seemed to study it for a moment, and then, with a grace that would make you think she had been doing it for years, Hinata stepped onto the surface of the water. Walking slowly, Hinata approached Naruto. Initially he recoiled at her approach, but when she also sank to her knees and pulled him into a hug, Naruto didn't resist. Instead he allowed himself to cry openly, drenching her shoulder in his sorrow. This is it. This is what changed. Naruto is no longer the untouchable idol. He's no longer the invincible, unshakable, and incorrigible demigod I made him out to be. He's every bit as human as I am, and every bit as fragile." Hinata's hug tightened a little bit as she felt Naruto's anger leaving, feeling his tensions slowly fading as he cried on her shoulder. "My poor Naruto-kun. I wonder how long you've agonized about telling us that. I wonder how it must have eaten at you inside as you watched parents glare and pull their children away. I can't begin to imagine what it would have felt like to grow up in your shoes." "Never again." Hinata's voice was a barely audible whisper, but even on the shore they heard it. Naruto looked up, his face tear-stained and slightly pale, obviously expecting anger or loathing. The look on Naruto's face almost broke Hinata's heart. "Never again, my poor Naruto-kun. Will you have to bear this terrible burden alone?" Naruto lowered his head to her shoulder again with a relieved look on his face, and again Hinata's whisper carried to the distant shore where the rest of the genin waited. "Come hell or high water, come wind, rain, and storm, I swear that I will always support you, Naruto-kun. No matter how far apart we are, I'll always be there for you." Unnoticed Tsunade and Jiraiya, as well as Asuma, Kurenai, Kakashi and Guy smiled. After a moment they all silently vanished, leaving behind the beginnings of a change that had been due for a long, long time. Epilogue. Naruto stood, silently staring down at the stone in front of him. Reaching down he traced the name. Hyuga Hinata. A small smile played across his face at the thought of her. It had been 10 years since his mask had slipped. 10 years to the day since his fellow shinobi and Kunoichi had discovered his secret. It had also been 4 years, 3 months, and 22 days since the death of Hyuga Hinata in the final push against the combined forces of the Akatsuki and Hidden Sound. Although it was hard, getting over Hinata's death, Naruto had reluctantly rejoined the ranks of his fellow ninja. Yet every morning he came here to this memorial. "You did well, Hinata-chan. 32, they cut off you and your party, and yet you managed to get 32 of the bastards by yourself before you fell. Who would have imagined that quiet little Hinata had such a strong heart?" "Sensei, sensei." Smiling Naruto turned around and surveyed the 3 students in front of him: Imono Kiano, Hyuga Jushi, and Nara Hinata. "Yes, Imono-san?" Kiano was about to speak again when Hinata spoke up behind him. "Why are you staring at that rock, sensei?" "Because Nara-san, on this rock is inscribed the names of heroes from our village." "Yosh, I want my name on that stone too." "Me too. I as well." Again Naruto couldn't help but smile as he stared down at the young Hyuga sitting in front of him. "He's so different from you, Hinata-chan. Who would have guessed that you sister Hanabi would raise such a spirited child? Be careful what you wish for, Hyuga-san. This is a stone to commemorate our fallen, the lost heroes of Hidden Leaf." An immediate pall seemed to hang over the group, silencing their shouts as they realized what they had just said. This stone was first erected a memorial for the dead in the aftermath of the Kyuubi attack. You children know about that, right? "Of course, sensei." Naruto smiled at the young Imono. His parents were fairly recent to the village. "And you know about Sealed Child?" "But of course, sensei, this is basic history. Everyone knows about the hero." Naruto smiled at his Nara student, Shikamaru's daughter, named for the women who had saved his wife's team at the cost of her own life. Naruto's own history had changed after the fight with the Akatsuki. He was now spoken of as the hero, although at his request his actual name was kept hidden. Opening his mouth to speak, Naruto was cut short when his Hyuga student spoke up. "Ano-sensei, did you know that rumors claim he's still in the village?" "Is that so, Hyuga-san?" The young Hyuga nodded importantly. "In fact," and here the boy dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "they claim that he took on a genin team this year. Do you know who he is, sensei? I bet it's Uchiha-sama." Shaking his head, Naruto also lowered his voice to a conspiratorial level. "'Fraid he's not, kid, but do you want to know a secret?" Immediately all 3 of his students leaned forward to hear better. "I am." With that, Naruto sat back up. The look on his students' faces was priceless, especially considering that none of them believed him. "Don't believe me, huh? How about now?" So saying, he lifted his shirt and channeled just enough chakra to make his seal visible. Looking at his students, he couldn't help but show a smug smirk at the looks of astonishment visible on their faces. "Did you know that I wasn't always considered a hero?" All 3 shook their heads in mute disbelief. "Then let me tell you a story about a young woman by the name of Hyuga Hinata, and how she managed to help change my image from that of a demon to that of a hero. You see, it all started 10 years ago on this very day. As Naruto told his genin team the tale of how Hinata had managed to look past his smiling exterior, his mind couldn't help but drift back to a young woman with dark blue hair and soft white eyes. Thank you, Hinata-chan. Thank you for everything. Hyuga Hinata. A small smile played across his face at the thought of her. It had been 10 years since his mask had slipped. 10 years to the day since his fellow shinobi and Kunoichi had discovered his secret. It had also been 4 years, 3 months, and 22 days since the name of Hyuga Hinata had been carved into the Monument of the Fallen after the final push against the combined forces of the Akatsuki and Hidden Sound. Although it was hard, Naruto had refused to accept Hinata's death. Naruto had adamantly refused to rejoin the ranks of his fellow ninja after the battle, and had swept the battlefield and surrounding area for days after the last battle, and still every morning he came here. Here to this memorial. You did well, Hinata-chan. 32, they cut off you and your party, and yet you managed to get 32 of the bastards by yourself before you fell. Who would have imagined that quiet little Hinata had such a strong heart? Sensei. Sensei. Smiling, Naruto turned around and surveyed the 3 students chattering animatedly in front of the terminally late Hitaki Kakashi. Imono Kiano, Hyuga Jushi, and Nara Hinata. Yes, Imono-san? Kiano was about to speak again when Hinata spoke up behind him. Why are you staring at that rock, sensei? Because Nara-san, on this rock is inscribed the names of heroes from our village. Yosh, I want my name on that stone too. Me too. I as well. Again Naruto couldn't help but smile as he stared down at the young Hyuga sitting across from him. He's so different from you, Hinata-chan. Who would have guessed that you sister Hanabi would raise such a spirited child? Speaking up and making himself known, the 6th leader of Hidden Leaf, Hokage Uzumaki Naruto beat Kakashi to the response. Be careful what you wish for, Hyuga-san. This is a stone to commemorate our fallen, the lost heroes of Hidden Leaf. An immediate pall seemed to hang over the group, silencing their shouts as they realized what they had just said, as well as who had responded to it. This stone was first erected a memorial for the dead in the aftermath of the Kyuubi attack. You children know about that, right? Of course, Hokage-sama. Naruto winked at the young Imono. His parents were fairly recent additions to the village. And you know about Sealed Child? But of course, Sensei told us this. It's basic history. Everyone knows about the hero. Naruto smiled at Kakashi's Nara student. Shikamaru's daughter Hinata had been named for the women who had saved his wife's team. Naruto's own history had changed after the fight with the Akatsuki. He was now spoken of as the hero, although at his request his actual name was kept hidden. Opening his mouth to speak, Naruto was cut short when the Hyuga student turned and spoke to Kakashi. Ano-sensei, did you know that rumors claim he's still in the village? Kakashi smiled over his newest book. Is that so, Hyuga-san? The young Hyuga nodded importantly. In fact, and here the boy dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. They claim that he teaches genin teams on and off. Do you know who he is, sensei? I bet it's Uchiha-sama. Shaking his head, Naruto smiled as he also lowered his voice to a conspiratorial level, bringing the focus of the kids back to himself. Afraid he's not, kid, but do you want to know a secret? Immediately all 3 of the students turned and leaned forward to hear better. I am. With that, Naruto sat back up. The look on the students' faces was priceless. Especially considering that none of them believed him. Don't believe me, huh? How about now? So saying, he opened his robe and lifted his shirt a little, then he channeled just enough chakra to make his seal visible. Looking at the students, he couldn't help but give a smug smirk at the looks of astonishment visible on their faces. Did you know that I wasn't always considered a hero? All 3 shook their heads in mute disbelief. Then let me tell you a story about a young woman by the name of Hyuga Hinata. At this point he was interrupted again. Ano Hokage-sama, but her name is on that stone. Aren't you married to her, Hokage-sama? Naruto smiled again at the young Imono. Indeed it is, and yes I am. In fact, she is the only living person to have her name carved on this rock, ever. How did it get there? Naruto paused and looked over the group, his face growing stern. The story I'm about to tell the 3 of you is classified, all right? You are not allowed to discuss it with anyone below Chunin level, and you are not allowed to speak of it, even in code, when someone below that level is present. This is a national secret until the people that it is about are both declared dead, are we clear? All three of the students swallowed hard, but all three of them nodded. Naruto gave them another stern look before nodding and starting his tale. Flashback, day of the final battle. Naruto stood, blood dripping from his numerous wounds, even as the Kyuubi fought to heal them. Looking around he could still see the last of the sound troops. They had surprisingly fought on even after Sasuke had defeated Orochimaru. Naruto himself had been willing to fight the snake, and it was a shock when Sasuke had stepped in and all but ordered Naruto to go after Itachi. For a moment Naruto had thought that it was some elaborate trick played by Kabuto to distract him. That was of course until he had seen the scars from where the curse seal had been removed. For a moment Naruto had hesitated, but Sasuke, seeing it, had called out. He's fused himself with the six-tailed cat, I'm no match for him. It had been the pain in Sasuke's eyes as he admitted his own inability to kill his brother that had finally driven Naruto away from Orochimaru and into the battle with Itachi. Naruto stood, eyes sweeping over the field, looking to see where he was most needed. Luckily the battles were all winding down, and everywhere the forces of Konoha were victorious. Thankful Naruto sat down. Truth be told he was too exhausted to fight much more anyway, and Kyuubi couldn't spare any energy as it was all going toward healing the gash Naruto had gotten in his lung when he had killed Itachi. What a fight, I think I'm going to sleep for a week, actually, scratch that. First I'm going to get a huge bowl of ramen with Hinata-chan, then I'm going to take a nice hot bath, and then I will sleep for a week. Wait, where is Hinata? Standing Naruto began scanning the battlefield. He and Hinata had only been dating for a couple of months now, but Naruto had developed a strong attachment to her in that short amount of time. Already he was considering popping the question, but he had wanted to be certain he would survive the final battle first. Throughout the fight he had been keeping a fairly close watch on her as she went around healing the fallen, but now he didn't see her anywhere. Striding quickly over to Tsunade he bent down. "Nei-chan? Where is Hinata?" Tsunade, who was busy treating a stabbing victim at the time, had just waved a hand in the general direction of the main body of the battlefield and muttered. "Went to treat Shikamaru's team." Before turning back to her work, Naruto frowned as Shikamaru's team had been in the hottest part of the fighting. Striding over to the cluster of trees that had been grown by one of Ino's jutsus, Naruto began scanning the groups of wounded until he saw a familiar pink-haired Kunoichi. Sakura-san? He and Sakura had been on thin ice for several months after her reaction to finding out about the Kyuubi, but thankfully they had patched things up after a long talk. Sakura, who had been resting from exhaustion, had cracked a single eye to show that she was listening. "Do you know where Hinata-chan is?" Sakura smiled. It had been something of a relief at first when Naruto had started avoiding her, but after a month she had found herself missing his incessant chatter, and the cool way he had spoken to her had only worsened the condition. It hadn't been until after she realized that she did in fact love him, as a brother, that they had patched things up. And the more he grew, the happier she was that he had forgiven her. She did not want to be on his bad side. "Over on the far side of the bramble patch last I saw, that was during combat though." Naruto thanked her, and then began walking toward the brambles that had been summoned in an attempt to keep enemy nins from finishing off the wounded. Naruto had just started to cut his way though when a hand reached out and grabbed him, pulling him to the ground where he landed face to face with Shikamaru himself. Shikamaru, obviously in a great deal of pain, had held a kunai to his face and snarled. "You won't get them, not while I still live." Rolling quickly away from the obviously delusional Shikamaru, Naruto had immediately called for the healers, and as they cleared the brambles away Shikamaru's team was found hidden beneath them, most gravely injured. Naruto, who had been searching for Hinata during the entire time, found the last person, Ino. Outside of a broken leg, she was nearly uninjured, and in a near panic Naruto had asked, "Ino, have you seen Hinata?" Ino paled dramatically. "You mean she didn't send you? But she led that group away almost 2 hours ago." Naruto, exhausted, as he was suddenly seemed to radiate nervous energy. "Which way did she go?" Ino had scarcely had time to point before Naruto was gone, following the multitude of footprints that led away from the battlefield. It had only taken 5 minutes before he had come upon the first body. It was a sound nin, and he had apparently died from a chakra spike to the head. Naruto could recognize the look of it from the numerous times he had witnessed the result after one of Neji's attacks. At least I know she went this way. Naruto had followed, reading the trail when he could, and guessing when he had no choice. Even with Kyuubi's enhanced senses, it had taken him nearly 2 days of following a trail of dead sound nins to find where Hinata had made her final stand, and there, laying in a depression, and surrounded by dead bodies, he had found Hinata. Even 2 days after the battle, some of her wounds oozed blood, and several of them showed signs of infection. Hinata herself had been lucky to survive as long as she had. The fact that she was still alive when Naruto found her was a miracle in itself. Scooping her up carefully so as not to reopen the wounds, Naruto had immediately started running back the way he had come. At least I can go faster now that I don't have to stop and hunt for tracks. Even moving as fast as he could, Naruto had been lucky to get her back in time. In fact, the moment he had gotten back, he had collapsed from exhaustion and chakra fatigue. Hinata had been rushed to the operating room, and Naruto sent straight to a bed. End flashback. Naruto leaned back, satisfied at the look of wonder on the faces of the young shinobi. But Hokage-sama, how did her name get on the rock? Naruto leaned forward again, gazing intently at Hanabi's child. Didn't I tell you? Huh. Well, Tsunade knew that I was alive, but when nobody could find Hinata, they assumed that she was taken captive and tortured to death. Her name was carved in the stone about an hour before I returned with her. It was a very near thing. But Hokage-sama, why her? Naruto frowned and looked at the young Imono. What do you mean, Kieno-san? Out of all the women in the village, why did you pick her? Naruto smiled again. He wasn't known as the storyteller for nothing, and most of the children in the village genuinely liked the stories he told. Well, it started when she managed to help change my image from that of a demon to that of a hero. Seeing their puzzled looks, Naruto elaborated, and even Kakashi became interested in the story as Naruto began. You see, it all started 10 years ago on this very day. As Naruto told the Genin team the tale of how Hinata had managed to look past his smiling exterior, his mind couldn't help but drift back to a girl with dark blue hair and soft white eyes who hid when he looked at her, and then drift forward to the same cheerful young women he had kissed on his way out the door this morning. Thank you, Hinata-chan, thank you for everything. Extended afterward. Although I didn't mention it specifically, Naruto proposed shortly after Hinata's recovery, and with her encouragement he became Hokage at the record age of 25, beating his own father by almost 2 years. They live happily in the Hokage's palace with their pet fox and 3 children. Kyuubi was released from his seal after entering into an agreement to be a summon-able guardian for Konoha. His clause was that he was allowed to eat anyone who had less than pure intentions. Naruto agreed. Shikamaru and Ino married about a year after the last battle, and their first child was named after Hinata, who had saved Ino's team by leading away and then single-handedly killing 32 enemy nins before succumbing to her own wounds. After years of nagging, Sasuke finally married Sakura, and they lived together for 5 happy years before Sakura's tragic assassination. Sasuke is currently spending all his time raising their 3 children. Neji and Tenten had a rather torrid love affair that was quite a scandal when it finally culminated with the 2 of them eloping to Sand. Naruto refused to declare either of them missing nins. Lee actually found a civilian girl who was a perfect match for him, and on occasion the 2 of them are seen practicing basic self-defense in the early mornings. Choji and Kiba are both currently bachelors, but lately Choji has been seen flirting with one of the younger cooks at his favorite BBQ stand. Shino's name currently resides on the Stone of the Fallen. He was killed in combat when he took out one of the Akatsuki who had forced a merge with a toad. The 2 remaining Sannin are still happily bickering, and are frequently seen drinking and reminiscing. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.